One of the biggest glaciers in Antarctica is melting. It is known as the Thwaites Glacier, and until recently it was stable, but scientists have discovered a worrying weakness in an ice shelf at the front of the glacier.
The scariest thing about Antarctica's Doomsday Glacier is not that it could raise the sea tomorrow. It will not. The scariest thing is quieter than that. A fractured ice shelf in West Antarctica is losing its grip on the sea floor. And once that break breaks, the glacier behind it can begin moving faster toward the ocean. Scientists are not warning about a Hollywood disaster. They are warning about a slow-motion door opening. And once it opens, no one knows how to close it. The glacier with the worst nickname on Earth. Thwaites Glacier sits in West Antarctica, facing the Amundsen Sea, in one of the most remote and difficult places scientists have ever tried to study. It has become famous under a name researchers do not love, but the public never forgets: the Doomsday Glacier. That nickname sounds exaggerated, but the reason behind it is real. Thwaites is one of the widest glaciers on Earth, roughly 120 kilometers across at its front, and it drains a vast section of the West Antarctic ice sheet. If Thwaites were to retreat completely, it contains enough ice to raise global sea levels by around 2 feet. But the deeper danger is that it may help destabilize the ice behind and around it. That is why scientists watch it so closely. Thwaites is not just another melting glacier, it is a keystone. It helps hold back other ice in the Amundsen Sea sector, including areas connected to Pine Island Glacier and the wider West Antarctic system. If Thwaites retreats far enough, the problem may stop being one glacier and become a regional failure. That is why the phrase Doomsday Glacier stuck, not because the world ends in one day, but because Thwaites sits in the wrong place, with the wrong shape, above the wrong kind of bedrock, facing the wrong kind of ocean water. The new warning is not that Thwaites suddenly exists. Scientists have known for years that it is vulnerable. The warning is that one of the structures slowing it down, the Thwaites Eastern Ice Shelf, is now so fractured and unstable that its breakup looks much closer than people once imagined. The break in front of the glacier. To understand the danger, you have to separate two things that often get confused. There is the glacier itself, which is grounded ice resting on land or bedrock below the surface. Then there is the ice shelf, which is the floating extension of that glacier as it pushes out over the ocean. Floating ice shelves do not raise sea level directly when they break apart because they are already floating. That is the ice cube in a glass rule. If the ice is already displacing water, melting it does not suddenly overflow the glass. But that is exactly where people misunderstand the threat. The Thwaites Eastern Ice Shelf is not dangerous because it raises sea level by breaking. It is dangerous because it acts like a brake. It presses back against the grounded glacier behind it, slowing the rate at which inland ice can slide into the ocean. Remove the brake, and the grounded ice behind it can accelerate. That grounded ice does raise sea level when it enters the ocean. That is the central idea. The example script got right, and the improved version has to keep it. The shelf is not the disaster. The shelf is the thing delaying the disaster. If it breaks apart, the ocean does not rise by several feet the next morning. But the glacier loses resistance, and the long-term consequences begin to move faster. In climate science, that distinction matters. Panic over the wrong thing makes people dismiss the right thing. The honest version is already serious enough. The single pinning point holding too much. The Thwaites Eastern Ice Shelf has been partly stabilized by a pinning point, a place where the underside of the floating ice catches against a rise in the sea floor. Picture a giant floating slab hooked onto a hidden ridge beneath the ocean. That contact point helps hold the shelf in position. As long as the shelf remains pinned, it can provide some buttressing force against the glacier behind it. The terrifying part is how much seems to depend on that contact. A massive glacier, a fractured shelf, and a whole section of West Antarctic stability are tied to one vulnerable connection with the seabed. That is where the phrase, "so much resting on so little," becomes the emotional center of the story. A country-sized system is being slowed by a floating structure that is cracked, thinning, and losing its grip. Over the last 2 decades, fractures have spread through the shear zone of the shelf, the area where ice, moving at different speeds, grinds and pulls against itself. A crack through the middle of stable ice can sometimes stop. A crack running through the stressed seam that helps hold the shelf together is more dangerous. It works against the part of the structure already under the most pressure. Scientists analyzing satellite observations, GPS data, and flow speeds from 2002 to 2022 found that the fractures have not been random. They have been growing in ways that point toward structural failure. The warning that moved from decades to years. For years, the public heard that Thwaites was a problem for the future. That made it easy to mentally file away. Future problems are comfortable because they do not demand immediate attention. But the latest warning around the Thwaites Eastern Ice Shelf feels different because the timeline has narrowed. Researchers are no longer talking only in vague end-of-century language. The fracture studies suggest the shelf is moving toward breakup within years, and some scientists have pointed to the possibility of serious breakup as soon as 2026. That does not mean the entire Thwaites Glacier collapses in 2026. It means the floating shelf that helps restrain part of it may disintegrate much sooner than many people expect. That distinction is important, but it does not make the warning smaller. In a system as large as Thwaites, the beginning of acceleration can matter more than the final moment. By the time the world sees dramatic shoreline effects, the process may already be deeply committed. This is why scientists sound alarmed. They are not watching one crack in isolation. They are watching a pattern, cracks spreading, flow changing, the pinning point weakening, warm ocean water reaching vulnerable areas, and models increasingly showing larger future losses when calibrated against real observations. Every new tool was supposed to reduce uncertainty. Instead, sharper tools have made the setup look worse. The attack from underneath. The most dangerous heat around Thwaites does not come from the air above. It comes from the ocean below. West Antarctica is vulnerable because much of its ice sits on bedrock below sea level. That geometry allows relatively warm, salty water from the deep ocean to travel along the seafloor and reach the grounding zone, the place where the glacier lifts off the bed and begins to float as an ice shelf. That warm water melts the ice from underneath, including areas no satellite can directly see. This is why Thwaites is so difficult to protect. You can look at the surface and see cracks, cliffs, and crevasses, but the real attack is happening in darkness below the ice. Warm water enters cavities, reaches contact points, eats away at the underside, and loosens the very structures that keep the glacier stable. This also explains why the problem is tied to global warming without needing cartoon exaggeration. The ocean has absorbed most of the excess heat trapped by greenhouse gases. That heat does not stay evenly spread at the surface. Ocean circulation can move warmer deep water toward Antarctica's continental shelf, where it interacts with ice from below. Thwaites is not being melted by a giant laser or a secret machine. It is being undermined by a warmer ocean, finding the weak geometry beneath West Antarctica. What BedMap 3 revealed. For a long time, the bed beneath Antarctica was one of the least understood landscapes on Earth. The surface could be mapped by satellites, but the ground under kilometers of ice was hidden. That matters because ice sheet stability depends heavily on bedrock shape. If the bed slopes downward inland, below sea level, retreat can become self-sustaining. If there are ridges, basins, troughs, or pinning points, they can change how ice moves and how warm water gets in. That is why BedMap 3 matters. It is the most detailed continent-wide map of Antarctica's ice surface, ice thickness, and bed topography so far. It includes decades of measurements and 84 new airborne surveys, adding tens of millions of data points. This is the kind of tool scientists need to understand not only where the ice is, but what it is sitting on. And when the hidden map became clearer, it did not make Thwaites look safer. BedMap 3 reinforces the basic problem. West Antarctica is not built like a simple block of ice sitting safely on high land. Large parts of it rest in marine basins below sea level. Thwaites drains through one of the most dangerous setups because warm water can access deep pathways and grounding zones. The clearer the underside becomes, the more obvious the trap looks. Thwaites is not vulnerable only because the planet is warming. It is vulnerable because warming is acting on a glacier with dangerous geometry. The runaway mechanism. The mechanism that worries scientists most is called marine ice sheet instability. It sounds technical, but the idea is simple. If a glacier rests on bedrock that slopes downward as it goes inland, then as the grounding line retreats, it moves into deeper water. In deeper water, the ice at the grounding line can be thicker. Thicker ice can flow faster into the ocean. Faster flow pulls the grounding line farther back. That exposes even deeper ice, which flows faster again. That is the loop. Retreat causes conditions that create more retreat. Once that loop begins in the wrong basin, there may be no easy natural break. Thwaites is scary because it sits in exactly the kind of setting where that instability can matter. It is not just losing ice from the front. Thinning has been observed far inland along its trough, which suggests the system is not merely changing at the edge. The change is reaching into the glacier's interior. This is the part of the story that should feel unsettling. A glacier does not need to collapse all at once to become dangerous. It only needs to cross thresholds where each new retreat makes the next retreat easier. The world is used to thinking in terms of events. A shelf breaks, an iceberg calves, a storm hits, a flood comes. Thwaites is different. It is a process. The event that gets attention may only be the visible sign that the process has already shifted. The models got more frightening when they got better. Climate models are often attacked as if they are just guesses, but the newer work on Thwaites is powerful because it tests models against what the glacier has actually done. In 2026, researchers used 2 independent ice sheet models calibrated with observations of velocity and surface elevation change from 2004 to 2017, then projected Thwaites forward to 2067. The uncomfortable finding was that the models best matching real-world losses also projected the largest future losses. That is a critical point. Scientists are not simply choosing the scariest scenario because it makes a better headline. They are asking which models reproduce observed behavior most realistically. And the ones that scored best against reality pointed toward very high future losses, around 180 to 200 billion tons of ice per year by the 2060s. That is close to the amount of ice Antarctica as a whole loses today, potentially coming from one glacier. This is the new storyline the improved script should push. The warning got scarier because the science got better. Better observations did not shrink the risk. Better bed maps did not simplify the geometry. Better model calibration did not make the worst outcomes look less likely. Instead, the tools converged on the same uncomfortable message. Thwaites may already be moving toward a more unstable future, and the most reliable models are not the calmest ones. They are the loudest alarms. The keystone of West Antarctica. Thwaites matters because of its position. It is not just a large glacier losing ice. It helps stabilize neighboring ice in the Amundsen Sea sector of West Antarctica. Think of a stone arch. The keystone is not the largest stone, but it controls the structure. Remove it, and the effect is not limited to the missing piece. The arch changes because everything around it depended on that pressure. Thwaites works in a similar way. If it retreats far enough, it can affect the glaciers and ice basins around it. Pine Island Glacier, another rapidly changing glacier in the region, is part of the same broader concern. The fear is that Thwaites could help unlock a much larger section of the West Antarctic ice sheet. Thwaites alone could contribute around 65 centimeters of global sea level rise if fully lost. But the wider West Antarctic ice sheet holds enough ice to raise global sea level by around 3 meters. 3 meters is not a number you brush past. It would redraw coastlines, reshape ports, threaten low-lying nations, flood parts of major cities, and force hundreds of millions of people to adapt, defend, or move. The cities usually listed in this conversation are not obscure places on a map. They include Miami, New York, London, Shanghai, Tokyo, and huge low-lying regions like Bangladesh. The danger is global because the ocean is connected. Thwaites is remote. Its consequences are not. What happens if the shelf breaks? If the Thwaites eastern ice shelf breaks apart, the world will probably not look different the next morning. That is why this story is hard to cover. There may be satellite images, headlines, expert quotes, and then daily life will continue. The sea will not leap several feet overnight. Most people will not feel the difference immediately. That is exactly why the warning can be so easily ignored. But scientifically, the breakup would matter because it removes resistance. The grounded glacier behind the shelf can speed up. Crevasses can open. Ice flow can reorganize. The grounding line can retreat. Over years and decades, those changes add up. The disaster is not the moment the shelf collapses. The disaster is the long acceleration that follows, especially if it enters a self-reinforcing marine ice sheet instability pattern. That makes Thwaites a communication problem as much as a climate problem. Humans are good at reacting to impact. We are much worse at reacting to commitment. If a bridge collapses, the danger is obvious. If engineers tell you a bridge is losing structural support and may become unsafe long before it falls, people argue, delay, and look for reasons to ignore it. Thwaites is that bridge, except it is made of ice, larger than many countries, and connected to every coastline on Earth. Why scientists were left in shock. The shock is not that Antarctica melts. Everyone in the field knows ice responds to warming. The shock is how many separate lines of evidence now point in the same direction. The fracture study shows a shelf weakening through decades of cracks. The pinning point work shows how much the shelf depends on a vulnerable seabed connection. Bedmap 3 reveals the dangerous below sea level geometry beneath Antarctica. Ocean measurements show warm water reaching ice from below. Ice sheet models, calibrated to real observations, project potentially huge losses by 2067. No single piece proves the whole future by itself, but together they build a pattern. That is what scientists take seriously. Science rarely becomes alarming because of one dramatic measurement. It becomes alarming when independent evidence starts lining up. The crack in the shelf, the shape of the bed, the ocean heat, the inland thinning, and the model projections are all different parts of the same warning. This is why the Doomsday Glacier label is both useful and dangerous. It gets attention, but it can also make the story sound like a movie. The real Thwaites story is more frightening than a movie because it is slower, more technical, and harder to reverse. There is no hero flying in at the last second to freeze the ocean. There is only physics, time, emissions, adaptation, and decisions made far from Antarctica. The original twist. Here is the original twist. Thwaites is not just a warning about sea level. It is a warning about how humans misunderstand slow disasters. We keep asking, when does it collapse? Because we want a date. Scientists are saying, the more important question is, when does the system become committed? Those are not the same thing. Collapse is what people see. Commitment is what physics does before people notice. A shelf can fracture for 20 years before the public hears about it. Warm water can melt from below where no camera sees it. A grounding line can retreat in a basin hidden under ice. A model can quietly become more accurate and more alarming at the same time. By the time the visible moment arrives, the most important part of the story may already be underway. That is what makes the Thwaites warning so powerful. It is not asking whether the ocean rises tomorrow. It is asking whether we are watching the early stages of a process future generations will not be able to easily stop. The terrifying part is not speed, it is momentum. What this does and does not mean. This does not mean the world ends next week. It does not mean every coastline floods in one dramatic event. It does not mean people should believe exaggerated videos claiming instant apocalypse. Thwaites is enormous, and enormous ice systems have inertia. Full collapse would unfold over decades to centuries, not days. But it also does not mean the warning is harmless. Slow does not mean small. A process can unfold over decades and still permanently reshape civilization. Sea level rise does not need to happen overnight to destroy value, displace communities, poison fresh water, raise storm surge, and force cities into impossible spending decisions. 1 foot matters, 2 feet matter, 3 meters would change the world. That is why the honest version is the strongest version. The shelf breaking is not the flood. It is the break failing. The glacier accelerating is not a movie scene. It is a long-term commitment. The science is not hidden. It is openly published. And the uncertainty is not whether ice loss matters. The uncertainty is how fast the consequences arrive and how much the world does before they do. So what do you think? Is Thwaites the clearest warning sign that the world is underestimating sea level rise? Or do you think scientists still have time to understand and slow the worst-case outcome? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about the hidden forces changing our planet before our eyes, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next.